Fundamental principles of political economy, the production and distribution of wealth. So the science which treats of the nature of wealth and the natural laws that govern its production and distribution. Now, most people would include the exchange of services like haircuts and medical treatments, as well as products. But in plain English, it's how civilized people make a living. This course is based on the American classic Progress and Poverty by Henry George, an inquiry into the cause of industrial depressions and of the increase of want with the increase of wealth, the remedy. So it basically comes down to how can we create full employment, make housing affordable, raise wages along with productivity, eliminate the business cycle, and finance government and social programs. Now, you've probably noticed that today a large percentage of houses are built in factories, reminiscent of the way Henry Ford built cars in the 1920s, rain or shine, day or night, delivered by truck and assembled in a day or two. In our cities, we now have skyscrapers that are built with the latest technology in less and less time, enabling denser populations with greater divisions of labor, more fully utilizing the infrastructure and yielding phenomenal economies of scale. We went from this 100 years ago to this, and today we have tractors that are a block long and gigantic farm machines and earth-moving trucks. Auto factories are assembling one car for every 35 hours of work. The results of labor being multiplied by first producing robotic machines, which on average have tripled the results of labor. Big trucks and the interstate highways have grossly reduced the cost of transportation, and computers and the internet have multiplied the rate at which we calculate, store, retrieve, and communicate information. Every place you look, whether it's how often you have to change your oil or paint your house these days, everywhere we look, productivity is increasing. And statistically, after adjusting for inflation and using 2019 dollars, productivity went from $30 worth of goods and services per hour in 1970 to $70 in 2019, which is a 133% increase. And at the same time, after adjusting for inflation, wages for the majority of workers were exactly where they were in 1973, almost 50 years later, $23 an hour in 2019 dollars. The tendency, of course, is for wages to remain static, and there are exceptions and interventions. And according to the Economic Policy Institute, wages did increase at about the rate of productivity from 1950 to 1970. They increased the minimum wage and enough to keep up with productivity. And I suppose that labor unions, which don't really affect non-union workers, but they certainly raise the average level or the aggregate level of productivity. In 1972, when they looked at total wages as a percentage of the gross domestic product, they were 52%. And by 2013, they were down to 42%, where they remained until the pandemic. And now they're 44%. So they've been on a slow and steady decline. Some part of it, of course, must be due to the fact that everybody's got a lot more capital that they're using, bigger machines. But after you deduct for inflation and you look at the interest rates, the return to buildings, machinery, inventory have been so low, it couldn't possibly explain the fact that productivity is increasing much faster than wages. And in terms of what you can buy or standard of living, wages tend to remain constant, as statistics say they have since 1879. We've intervened with the minimum wage and the 8-hour day. Employers have been forced to contribute to Social Security and Medicare. And of course, labor unions have had some success, but this tendency continues, this divergency continues. Now, if you want to raise wages, the first thing you do is you create more jobs than you actually need. And in 2006, we had 63% of the adult population working there. And then the recession came in 2008, and it was down to 58%. And just before the pandemic, it was up to 61% of the adult population working. So that's less than it was before the recession began. And I would suggest that poverty then has got to be a combination of unemployment and the low wages that result from not enough jobs for everybody, plus the cost of living. And according to the census, 12.8% of Americans, or 42 million people, were living in poverty in 2021. Ameliorated by somewhere around $1 trillion in public and private programs. And that's in addition to Social Security and Medicare, considered by many to be the most effective anti-poverty programs, at least so far. Now, in addition to the general tendency of not enough jobs and low wages and so on, what about recessions? Why can't everybody put their labor into the system and take out an equal value of the products of other people's labor? So in 2007, we had 156 million people working, and then we had a recession. And by 2010, there were only 445 million Americans working. So you got to ask, what about 11 million less people working? Why was that? How could that be? We certainly had the same workforce with the same skills and knowledge, the same natural resources, the same level of technology, the same buildings and machines, and essentially the same money and credit system in 2010 that we had in 2007, and yet we ended up with 11 million less people working. Now, in spite of all the millions and millions of new jobs that were created, and I'm talking about while Barack Obama was president, just to reflect on the time period, 2016 started with only 1.1% more of the population working than there was in 2010, which was the depth of the recession down here. There's 2010, and 2016 had 1.1% more of the population working. It looks like about 1% of the loss employment was due to the baby boomers turning 65, and they were retired. And a little bit was due to people living longer, which would make a smaller percentage of the adult population working. But it looks like legal immigration of skilled workers was the biggest reason why we never got back to the pre-recession levels of employment. Still, in 2016, although we had more people working, we had 3.5% less of the population employed than before the recession. Before the pandemic in 2019, we had 2% of the less of the population working, the adult population, I should say, working than before the recession 12 years before. So that's the recession, but then comes the general question. Whether we're in a recession or not, why are the very least productive workers always unemployed? Why don't wages increase with advancing technology? Why are the recurring periods of hyper unemployment, which I'm calling a recession? So let's take a look at the production of wealth. Labor, mental and physical labor, applied to the natural resources. We combine them, we separate them, we change them in form or in place. First, we produce the capital wealth, buildings, machines, seeds and fertilizer, inventories, which give our labor a greater efficiency in producing food, clothing, shelter, automobiles, televisions, toasters, which we store, we transport, we trade, and finally we put in the hands of the ultimate consumer. So anything that gets a natural resource to the consumer in the desired form is part of production. Where does money come into all this? They say money makes the world go around. Can you eat it? Can you wear it? Can you live in it? Can you drive around in it? What do you do with money? Now, this is where I'd like to have a reaction. I can't hear anybody. Deborah, are you there?
Yes, we're all muted. So
Oh,
if
well,
anybody wants to react, they'll need to press the
somebody
space
unmute
bar.
themselves, and somebody who's got a quiet room unmute themselves. So there'll be
We buy the
somebody
things we
reacting
want.
there. So what do we do with money?
Yeah, if I could,
We
if
buy
I
stuff.
could
with-
say something, yeah,
Yeah, so it's a medium of exchange, isn't it?
as fast as you can, get it out of your hands.
Yeah, there you go. Now, which of these cars is worth more? You know, you've got this nice
Dude.
Top Gun Nano with a back seat and 4 doors, a steel roof over it, and this
Yeah,
bare
come over
bones
here and
thing
see.
called a Mercedes Benz. Which one of them might be worth more?
Actually, not that one.
That's a chat.
This one here, huh? And why would it be worth more? Now, of course, some people are going to pay extra for that fancy hood ornament and status symbol and so on. Well, wouldn't and of course the research and development of it and the patents make it worth more.
They're listening to us.
But basically, it costs more to produce, doesn't it?
Look.
Is that a yes? So which one of these costs more to produce?
Same thing.
Yeah, last I checked, they were 6 cents a piece to make. So would printing money be the same as growing food or building houses or making cars? I know there are people down in Washington who kind of act that way, but we know it's not the same thing, right? And
Right.
that's really all I'm getting at here is that it's not the same thing. Now, so returning to these questions, why are the very least productive people always unemployable? Can they not produce enough that they could be paid the legal minimum wage, or are there not enough jobs? Now you can see, obviously, if they couldn't produce enough, then as productivity increased, then less and less people would be unemployed, right? And then we ask, why are the least educated and skilled who are actually working always at the minimum wage? Do they not produce enough that they could be paid more than the minimum wage? And of course, if productivity was constantly increasing, then that would be another story. So just to illustrate how productivity is increasing, I go into McDonald's and I see that the line isn't going anywhere and the manager is talking to the cashier, and I listen and he says, "Sir, don't worry, I can make the change. I'm going to get a degree in accounting in another month or so. Don't worry, I'll write the slips." Oh, okay, that's good. But who's going to get you through the line faster? The college graduate with a degree in accounting or the high school dropout with an electronic cash register?
It would be the same.
Well, maybe it depends on how fast that guy was. But the customer says Big Mac, medium Coke, small fries. And so the high school dropout pushes the pictures and the computer rings up $7.75. So she says to the guy, $7.75, and the customer gives her a $10 bill. At that point, the register says, give that guy $2, and a quarter rolls out the slot, and she says, next. So you say, well, yeah, but it's an electronic cash register. Yet we know that these electronic cash registers that not only get you through the line pretty quick, but they inventory as they go. And in some cases, they even order the new supplies for the next day. And they cost a small fraction of what even a minimum wage worker gets paid. We go to the supermarket, same thing, scanners, bam, drag it past. The carpenter's got all kind of portable, battery-powered, very versatile tools. The guy that mows grass with a 0-turn mower can do the work of 2 or 3 guys with push mowers. Even dishwashers. How about the garbage man that does the whole operation by himself? Think of the 100,000 improvements which these only suggest, things that we've seen in our lifetime. If unemployable people could not produce enough that they could be paid the legal minimum wage, what would we expect? As productivity increased, the number of unemployable people would steadily decline. Has that happened? I'm going to say no, it hasn't happened. If wages increased with productivity, wouldn't the legal minimum wage become superfluous? Instead, we're
That's
still,
true.
thank you. We're still debating how much to raise the minimum wage in order to keep up with the cost of living. Wages, the least productive workers are always unemployable under the present circumstances. Productivity is continually increasing, and there are never enough jobs. So why aren't there enough jobs? Why can't people put their labor into the system and take out of the system a value equal to the one they put in, the products of other people's labor? So the question remains, can you live and produce without land? And you make something out of nothing, in other words. Is there any free land in the United States where you could go and employ yourself?
No.
We once had 600, we do have 600,000 square miles of arable land. And that's not counting a lot of land that could grow things, but isn't. I can't get the statistics of how much land we actually have that could grow things. Nonetheless, we have 333 million people, and that comes out to 547 people per square mile of arable land. Now, to put this in a perspective, France has 964 people per square mile of arable land. The United Kingdom has 1,908 people per square mile of arable land. America is very sparsely populated. There was once free land in America, a free land opportunity, and the highest standard of living in the world. Fair statement? I'm talking a long time ago now. So you
I
wonder,
remember them days.
yeah. So you wonder what happened to it. And here I've set up a hypothetical territory. Our first settler is looking for the very best land that's still free. She gets across the swamp and the river, and then beset by the sameness and the richness, she stops somewhere, anywhere, and builds a homestead. The second settler arrives and asks, "Is that your cabin?" "Yeah." "Are all those crops that are growing, are they yours?" "Yes, they are." "Okay, what makes them yours?" "I built that cabin. I planted that crop. They're the fruits of my labor." "Well, yes, everybody must keep what they produce. If they can't keep what they produce, they're going to starve to death, aren't they?" "But I noticed you staked off a couple 100 acres of land. Are you saying that you made the land too?" "Well, no, but I was the first to claim it." And of course, if claiming something made it yours, wouldn't somebody have claimed the entire earth 1,000 years ago or more? But the second settler says, "Listen, only 2 of us even know about this place. And if you'll acknowledge this 200 acres up here as mine, I'll acknowledge that 200 acres down there is yours. I'll never set foot on your land and you'll never set foot on mine. And if somebody comes along and tries to take either of our plots away from us, we'll stick together. Is that a deal?" "Yeah." Now we have title to land. Without title to land, would anybody plant a crop, much less build a house or a modern factory? They couldn't even put up a fence and lock the door. So title to land simply gives you a guarantee that you can keep what you produce on the land, or maybe a lot more likelihood of it, a legal right to keep what you produce on the land. Now, a third settler comes along. And the question is, do these two settlers have any advantage over the newcomer? The land is just as fertile, excellent fertility. It's just as close to the river, so that for transportation and trade, for fishing, they're in the best position of all. But still, title to land gives them no advantage over somebody who comes and takes the land that's free. What would you say to the Tom, Dick, and Harry?
Make me an offer.
We're going to take a little bit of stock and say, if we look at on the left side of the river, and we add up everything that's produced for a year, and we divide it by the number of days worked, it comes out to $9 a day, because it's very fertile land and it's got access to the river. The land on the right side, even though it's just as fertile, has the swamp that impedes transportation and trade. And at the end of the year, the average is $8 a day. The average worker can produce $8 a day with their tools and their equipment. And on the less fertile land, $7, and on the land that's still free, on average, $6 results. So she says, Tom, Dick, Harry, how much will you offer me to use my land? I got enough land for one family. Well, if they were all average workers, it really would offer approximately the same thing. But let's try and make it as realistic as we can and say that Tom can only produce half of what the average person can produce, and he can produce $3 on the land that's free, where he keeps everything, it's his, or $4.50 a day on the very best land like our first settler has. So the most he could offer would be the difference. Nobody is going to accept a situation where they get less than they could produce working for themselves. So he might say, well, something less than, I'll pay you less than $1.50 a day. And then Dick, who's the average worker, can produce $6 a day on the free land, $9 a day on the best land. How much can he offer? Well, he could offer anything up to $3, couldn't he? Otherwise, if he produces 9 and he gives more than 3, he would get less than 6. So he might say $2.90. And she says, well, that's good, but Harry, what about you? And if Harry was the superior worker who could produce double the average, he could produce $12 where the land is free and $18 on the best land. He could say, well, I could pay anything up to $6, but if $2.90 is the highest bid, I'm going to offer $3. So if he produced 18, he gives up 3 in land rent, he keeps 15. 15 is a lot better than 12, isn't it? So he outbids his competitors, and he gets control of the very best land. Now, supposing you're a blacksmith in century or two back, and you could go to the free land, and whatever you produce is yours, but you might have a dozen people within a mile or so of where you are, or you could go to a little village where there might be 100 or 200 families. Where would be the best location for a blacksmith? And if I wanted to carry it to the extreme, I would say, what if you're the very best shoe salesman in the city of New York? And you walk up Fifth Avenue and you get to 55th and Fifth Avenue, and you looking for a little hole in the wall, shall we say, to set up your shoe store. And you find out you're going to have to pay them something more than $10,000 a month to outbid everybody else. Whoa. You go down Fifth Avenue, 50 blocks, I can get it for $5,000 a month. You go out to Brooklyn, 1,000 a month. Oh, now that's getting a little more reasonable. But what is it 55th and Fifth Avenue? And you're the best shoe salesman in the city of New York. That is not 150 blocks south or over in Brooklyn.
Foot traffic.
Yeah, potential customers. So, thank you. So you say, well, if I can outbid everybody else because I'm a better salesman, I want to be where there's the potential customers. So who went west when there actually was free land? Was it the college graduates and the skilled craftsmen like Paul Revere and the Chippendale furniture makers, or the young adventurer? No rent to pay. The land is free. Doesn't matter how little you produce, it's all yours. No rent has to be paid in advance, especially. Now, if we turn the thing around and we say, our second settler is old and she's about to retire. She says, my barn is shot. I got no tools and equipment. They're all worn out, but I got some pretty good land here. And I'm going to see if I can hire the average worker to bring his tools and equipment and use my land. And I can see that on the average, he can produce $9 a day. Whoa. He can produce $9 a day. On his own land down here, he can only produce $6 a day. So the question is, how much would she have to pay him out of the $9 that he produces on her land? And so it's a simple question of, would anybody work for somebody else unless they were offered more than they could produce working for themselves? Nobody works for somebody else unless they're offered at least as much as they can produce working for themselves. So out of the 9, the worker with his tools and equipment gets 6, and the landowner gets 3. So it's kind of like two sides of the same coin. Now, just to review it, if there's free land out there and it yields on average $8, $8 can be produced every day with tools and equipment. And then the producers get to keep it all. And on the 9 land, there's an advantage or a surplus of 1. And whether you rent the land to somebody else and they pay you that 1 for the opportunity to work on the superior land, or if you work on the superior land and you produce 9 instead of 8 because of the superior opportunity, we call that rent. And as the frontier moves to less productive potential, obviously now the producers can keep all 7 if they work their own land and that's free. And if they produce 8 on the 8 land or 9 on the 9 land, they have to give up the difference. And finally, we get to the point where the free land yields is on average 6, and the superior results we call rent. On the 7, 8, 9, it's 1, 2, 3. Any questions or comments? Nothing? No.
I do have one question.
Yeah.
How many years you have experience like with this?
In real estate, direct.
How many years have I been promoting this thesis? Is that what
Yeah,
you-
exactly. Yes.
50, over 50.
Over 50 years?
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Good job. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I haven't done it like this for 50 years, but I have been teaching it for 50 years as a volunteer. So any comments?
I got one. Could you explain when you was talking about the minimum wage for people,
Yeah,
right? Obviously you got some people who are just gonna need some help, right? Disabled people and such.
Well,
But if,
under the present circumstances, there's a lot of people need help. There's no two ways about it. in my mind,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, because it seems to me that the minimum wage is more of an anchor around people's necks than anything, because it basically creates a monopoly where all employers give you one wage. So you don't have the capacity to compete for higher wages. If
Right.
everybody across the industry, everybody gets paid the same thing.
Well, there's true. it's
And the
true-
corporations seem like they want to go ahead and adopt that because it's cheaper for labor. Like in Florida, where I'm at now,
Yeah.
people are not paid for what they're producing.
No, no.
you
and if
talk-
there's- even in that model where there was free land, if you
Yeah.
worked on the superior land, you didn't get paid what you produced. You got paid what you could have produced where the land is free.
Right, right.
And I would say that we.
But I mean, the
we're gonna-
government seems,
In 2 weeks, we're gonna get to what, under the present circumstances, what happens to wages and the minimum wage, but I think it would suffice to say that if they raise them, you say everybody gets the same, but let's say that the minimum wage is $7 and you're earning $10 an hour because you're working harder or smarter. And then they raise the minimum wage to $10 an hour. What is your incentive to work harder and smarter like you did before, when you're getting the same as everybody else? So I argue that they would raise your wages to $13 so that you would still have that same incentive to work harder and smarter.
they got people lined up out the door waiting for jobs.
Yeah,
They got this myth going around that nobody wants to work.
yeah, well, that's, of course, that's a myth, but I suppose that there is some little bit of truth to the idea that if you pay people welfare, which is just enough to survive, and you get Medicaid with welfare, and then if you get a minimum wage job, you don't get Medicaid, but you do get about the same as you were getting on welfare. It comes down to this axiom of human behavior. People seek to satisfy their desires with the least exertion. And if I can get a higher standard of living by not working on welfare, then if I take a job, what am I going to do? So I think that's the biggest part of the problem. And it would easily be solved by raising the minimum wage to about $20 an hour, which is about where it would be if wages had kept up with productivity over the last 50 years.
If there is true competition for the wages in this country, there'd be a big difference in wages.
A bigger difference, I guess.
Well, I mean, you were.
But I mean,
pointing out,
under
like
the-
at McDonald's,
Yeah.
McDonald's is a tremendously profitable business.
Yeah.
But they collusively refuse to pay the workers more than the minimum wage, or, like 15, like down here in Florida, it's $15 an hour.
Which is,
Managers get like $16, $17.
that's all, $2 more.
Yeah. I mean, it's,
But see it as thinking of it under the present circumstances, thinking of it from the McDonald's point of view, trying to make the most profit. That's what they're in business for, to make a profit and to make the biggest one they possibly can. And if you're willing to work for $15 an hour, that's all they're going to pay you. And unless you start working less efficiently, then they might think how they can get you to work more efficiently, and usually higher pay works pretty good. And that's why the manager gets $2 more. Right?
yeah.
All right, thank you. That was good. So I'm going to go on and we'll talk about some terms. Now, terms are subjective labels, shorthand for definitions. So in political economy, when we say production, we're talking about all activities that contribute to getting a natural resource to the consumer in the desired form. So we're talking about plowing a field, digging minerals, waiting on a customer in a department store. Anything that gets a natural resource to the consumer in the desired form is part of production. Now we've got a list of things here. And we need a term that would include all of these things. So let's see what characteristics these things have in common. House and furniture, automobile, books for reading, wedding dress, TV, computer, phone. Are all of these things material?
Yes.
Thank you. Are all of them produced by people?
Yes,
Can they satisfy human desires?
yes,
And do they have a value in exchange?
yes.
And so what should we call all those things that are material produced by people, can satisfy human desires and have a value in exchange?
Capital.
Goods.
Well,
Goods, yeah, goods, goods a good term, goods or products or something. Now, 200 years ago, when the science of political economy was evolving, somewhere they decided to call all these things wealth. So anything that is material, produced by people, can satisfy human desires and has a value in exchange, we subjectively call wealth. You know, it's like, my name is Mike, but you can't look at me and tell that my name is Mike, and the same thing with these things in wealth. That's just something they decided to call it. Now, not the blacktop, but the parking space, the ground under a house, the Grand Canyon, the sun, the moon, the stars, polar bears in the Arctic, trees in a natural forest. Are all of them part of the universe?
Yes.
Are any of them people?
No.
And are any of them products made by people?
No.
So the entire material universe, except people and their products, what do you suppose we should call that? We could call it nature or natural resources.
land.
Land, there's the answer I was looking for, right? And so 200 years ago, and they were developing this discipline called political economy, they decided to call all of nature land. So if you're not taking this course and you're talking about it to somebody and you say, oh yeah, I just found out the ocean is land. You're not going to get very, that conversation is probably going to come to a screeching halt. But for the purpose of this class and political economy, that's what they called it. All the unaltered gifts of nature. Now, here are people, what do we call the efforts of people in the production of wealth? The truck driver, the shoe salesman, the auto mechanic, carpenter, cook, factory worker, Walmart executive, plantation slave, chemical engineer, and computer programmer. Man, whoever made up that list was covering the whole gamut, huh?
That would be labor, right?
Correct, you are. Labor, the efforts of the following people, the mental and physical exertion. Now, let me go to the next slide. All human exertion expended in the production of wealth, we call labor. Now, what's the difference between these two groups? The auto mechanic, the carpenter, shoe salesman, auto factory worker, Walmart executive, plantation slave, and the doctor, teacher, baseball player, divorce lawyer, nightclub singer, and massage therapist.
Column B would be service workers.
Amen. So the first category, it's all mental or physical energy exerted, and the same in the second. And in the first category, each one's energy results in a valuable product. And as you say, this one ends up in satisfaction, valuable satisfaction. So we call the first one labor, and as you say, we call the second one service because it's not material. That was good. Thank you. And then we have steel mill, lumber truck, brewery vat, taxi cab, garbage truck, toaster, and on the shelf of a store, and trees planted in a nursery, sewing machine in a factory, 10,000 pints of bottled water, auto assembly plant. So these are all wealth used to produce more wealth for exchange. And some people would say these are products in the course of exchange, at least some of them, and products in the process of being made, and wealth which is expected to afford an income. So the proper definition is wealth used to produce more wealth for exchange. And what do we call it? Where's that guy that had the last one? Had the labor and service.
That's called the, oh, God,
Well,
escaped.
it's certainly wealth.
Yeah,
But what kind of
Yeah.
wealth is it?
Production equipment.
Capital
or,
wealth.
Capital goods.
Yeah.
capital wealth, yeah.
Capital wealth, but and goods are works fine and it expresses exactly what we wanted, but the proper term in political economy is capital. And all capital is wealth, but of course, all wealth is not used to produce more wealth for exchange, so it's not capital. And what Henry George points out, and I'm not sure how important this is, but he says, if you have a hammer and saw and tools that you're repairing your own house, you're not part of the economy. You're not going to exchange any of these things. It's wealth, but it's not really capital. So, okay. Now, the next category, we have a title to a BMW, 2 shares of stock in GM, a house, a deed to a house, and a $100 savings bond. Skill, knowledge, intelligence, and talent. And all of these things are valuable, but none of them are land, labor, capital, or wealth. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
So what are they? What is this first category of things?
Proof of ownership or,
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Exactly what I wanted you to say. How about this? Claim on to valuable things. Proof of ownership. That was perfect. And of course, in this case, the BMW, it is wealth. Claim on wealth. In this case, it may be wealth in the factory and the products that they're making, but it's also land and patents and other monopolies. And the house is certainly wealth and land. And the savings bond is what? A claim on money, isn't it? The government will give you so much money for a saving, $100 savings bond, they'll give you $100 if you're willing to wait a while. So what are these other things in the right-hand column? Skill, knowledge, intelligence, talent. They're not land, labor, capital, or wealth, are they?
they're intellectual property.
Yep, that's what they are. You could say that very well. And how about human attributes? Which would be in a way the same kind of thing. Intellectual, well, I don't know about the property part, maybe, but certainly they're human attributes. Now we've got 3 factors of production: land, labor, and capital. Which one of them is the passive factor? How about land?
Yeah,
I'm
land.
sorry, go ahead.
Land.
Land, sure, the passive factor. And so labor and capital are the active factors. Land doesn't do anything, it's just there. Now, of course, in the case of energy, the energy is harnessed, but the energy doesn't really produce anything, does it? It's labor and capital that produce things out of land and on land. And land and labor are the primary factors, and capital is the compound factor made by labor out of land. The three factors are mutually exclusive. So each definition excludes the other two. So you can't say, oh, that's labor and capital, it's land and capital. It's got to be one or the other, one of the three. That's all. Now, another way to kind of put this together is the production and distribution of wealth, and the factors of production, land, labor, and capital produce wealth. And the avenues of distribution are wages based on the law of wages, which we will get to eventually, and interest based on the law of interest. And whatever is left goes to the owner of land as the surplus, rent. There are lots of monopolists in this world. Ask the drug companies. And there's the government that taxes your wages in some cases, and anything you buy or sell, they get a cut of it and so on. But I want to wait until later and focus on what Henry George terms as the natural laws of distribution. That these are these other interventions, these other confiscations are man-made laws, and they don't follow the laws of nature. Wages, of course, are all gains from a human exertion, whether you're getting paid wages or you're keeping what you produce yourself, they're your wages. And interest, all the gains from the ownership of capital, whether you use it yourself or you lend it to somebody else and they pay you interest. But remember, when something wears out and it has to be replaced, we're not counting that as interest. Rent, all the gains from the ownership of land. So if you rented a piece of land from somebody else, that's pretty obvious. But if you own the land on which you're working and producing, that portion which of the product that results because you have a superior opportunity, we also call rent. Profits, not used in political economy, only because it's the return on an investment, and a profit can come from land, labor, or capital. Now, there's always wages, but if no capital is used, there isn't interest. If the land is free, there isn't any rent. If capital is used, there would be interest, even if the owner and user are the same person, as I said before. Most production uses valuable land and yields rent. There's rent as long as the land offers an advantage over the free land, even if the owner and user are the same person. Now, by the time George wrote Progress and Poverty, he observed that the tendency had already begun in which all the increase in productivity went to rent, and wages and interest tended to remain constant, no matter how much productivity increased. And I think even though we've intervened by raising the minimum wage, by forcing people to pay you overtime if you work more than 8 hours a day and so on, this tendency remains. And paper money, credit money, fiat has a value based on what? Its value is not relative to the cost of production, because a $1 bill and a $100 bill cost the same to make it.
It's exchange value.
It's right, exactly. What you can get for it in exchange. So it's a medium of exchange, a store of value, not a very good one right now, is it? And a measure of value. And even in George's day, the primary function of money was to measure things. That credit and so on facilitated a large percentage of exchange, as it does today. I don't know what percentage of transactions are actually conducted with money, but it's probably a very small percentage. And George says, whatever in any time and place is accepted as a medium of exchange is in that time and place money. So somebody's going to say, well, what about a debit card? Is that money? I don't know. I haven't made up my mind yet. If you have an opinion, I'd be very interested in hearing it. But it would be, if it was universally accepted in any time and place, be money. But I don't know if it is universally accepted yet. So I'm going to say, I don't know. But what we do know is that things like Confederate money, which might even be worth more than its face value because it's an antique. What was it worth at the end of the Civil War?
Nothing.
Nothing at all, was it? Now, we have commodity money, and we know that commodity money is wealth because it produced, it satisfies human desires, it has a value in exchange. But the fact that the Canadian dollar, which says $5, and the American dollar, which says $1, are worth the same amount, right? And they're not worth what they say on the face of them. They're worth whatever the silver's worth. So they're not really money. They're bullion. They're wealth. And the same goes for these antique coins. They have some silver and they're worth whatever the silver's worth, but the additional money that they're worth, the additional value that they're worth is simply what they're worth to a collector, an antique collector. Thank you. And thank you, Debbie. And thank you, Win, for helping me with this. I really appreciate it. And Joe Walls, thank you.
Hey, man.
I really appreciate it.
No, you did good, man. It's especially for the first time. I'm surprised that you guys managed to get the technology right.
Well, that's because I have Deborah Ricard here. No other reason.
All right, now that you identified her, I'll be knocking on her door
Okay.
because I can't figure this stuff out.
It's rough. I admit. All right, let's see if I can stop the share and get my script up here to read to you. Yeah, that's good. All right. So when in the introductory to Progress and Poverty, he says, to those who seeing the vice and misery that spring from the unequal distribution of wealth and privilege, feel the possibility of a higher social state and would strive for its attainment. San Francisco, March of 1879. The utilization of steam and electricity, improved processes and labor-saving machinery, the great subdivision and grander scale of production, and the wonderful facility of exchange have multiplied enormously the effectiveness of labor. It was natural to expect, and it was expected, that labor-saving inventions would lighten the toil and improve the condition of the worker, that the enormous increase in the power of producing wealth would make real poverty a thing of the past. Could a Franklin or a Priestley have seen in a vision of the future the steamship taking the place of the sailing vessel, the railway train of the wagon, the reaping machine of the scythe? Could he have heard the throb of engines and in obedience to human will and for the satisfaction of human desire, exert a power greater than that of all the men and all the beasts of burden of the earth combined? Could he have seen the forest tree transformed into finished lumber with hardly the touch of a human hand? The great workshops where boots and shoes are turned out by the case with less labor than the old-fashioned cobbler needed to put on a sole. The factories where cotton becomes cloth faster than hundreds of weavers could have turned it out with their hand looms. Could he have seen steam hammers shaping mammoth shafts and mighty anchors, and delicate machinery making tiny watches? The diamond drill cutting through the heart of rocks, and coal oil sparing the whale? Could he have realized the enormous saving of labor resulting from improved facilities of exchange and communication? Sheep killed in Australia, eaten fresh in England, and the order given by the London banker in the afternoon, executed in San Francisco in the morning of the same day. Could he have conceived of the 100,000 improvements which these only suggest? What would he have inferred as to the social condition of mankind? He would have seen those muscles of iron and sinews of steel making the poorest worker's life a holiday, in which every high quality and noble impulse could have scope to grow. How could the vice, the crime, the ignorance, the brutality that spring from poverty and the fear of poverty exist where poverty had vanished? It is true that disappointment has followed disappointment. Invention after invention have neither lessened the toil nor brought relief to the poor. But there have been so many things to which it seemed this failure could be attributed that up to our time, the new faith has hardly weakened. Now, however, there can be no mistaking. From all parts of the civilized world come complaints of labor condemned to involuntary idleness, of capital massed and wasting, of pecuniary distress among businessmen, of want and suffering and anxiety among the working classes. There is distress where large standing armies are maintained, but there is also distress where standing armies are nominal. There is distress where protective tariffs stupidly and wastefully hamper trade, but there is also distress where trade is nearly free. There is distress where autocratic government yet prevails, but there is also distress where political power is wholly in the hands of the people. In countries where paper is money, and in countries where gold and silver are the only currency. Evidently, beneath all such things as these, we must infer a common cause, and it is either what we call material progress or something closely connected becomes more than an inference when it is noted that industrial depressions are but intensifications which show themselves more clearly and strongly as material progress goes on. Some get an infinitely better and easier living, but others find it hard to get a living at all. The tramp comes with a locomotive, and almshouses and prisons are as surely the marks of material progress as are costly dwellings and magnificent churches. Upon streets lighted with gas and patrolled by uniformed policemen, beggars wait for the passerby. And in the shadow of college and library are gathering the more hideous Huns and fiercer vandals. It is true that wealth has been greatly increased and that the average of comfort, leisure, and refinement have been raised, but these gains are not general. In them, the lowest class do not share. I do not mean that the condition of the lowest class has nowhere nor in anything been improved, but that there is nowhere any improvement which can be credited to the increased productive power. It is as though an immense wedge were being forced, not underneath society, but through it. Those who are above the point of separation are elevated, but those who are below are crushed down. The association of poverty with progress is the great enigma of our times. It is the central fact that perplexes the world and with which statesmanship and philanthropy and education grapple in vain. It is the riddle that the Sphinx of fate puts to our civilization, which not to answer is to be destroyed. So long as all the increased wealth which modern progress brings goes but to build up great fortunes, to increase luxury and make sharper the contrast between the house of have and the house of want, progress is not real and cannot be permanent. To educate men who are condemned to poverty is but to make them restive. The ideas that there is a necessary conflict between capital and labor, that machinery is an evil, that competition must be restrained and interest abolished, that wealth may be created by the issue of money, that it is the duty of government to furnish capital or to furnish work, are rapidly making way among the great body of people who keenly feel a hurt and are sharply conscious of a wrong. Such ideas, which bring great masses of men, the repositories of ultimate political power, under the leadership of charlatans and demagogues, are fraught with danger. but they cannot be successfully combated until political economy shall commend itself to the perceptions of the great masses of men. I propose to solve by the methods of political economy a law which associates poverty with progress and increases want with advancing wealth. And in the explanation of this paradox, we shall find the explanation of those recurring seasons of industrial and commercial paralysis, which viewed independently seem so inexplicable. Political economy, as at present taught, does not explain the persistence of poverty amid advancing wealth in a manner that accords with the deep-seated perceptions of men. That the unquestionable truths that it does teach are unrelated and disjointed. That it has failed to make progress in popular thought, and on the contrary, after a century of cultivation, during which it has engrossed the attention of some of the most subtle and powerful intellects, it should be spurned by the statesmen and relegated, in the opinion of many educated and thinking men, to the rank of a pseudoscience, must be due not to any inability of the science when properly pursued, but to some false step in its premises. And as such mistakes are generally concealed by the respect paid to authority, I propose in this inquiry to take nothing for granted. I propose to beg no question, to shrink from no conclusion, but to follow truth wherever it may lead. If the conclusions we reach run counter to our prejudices, let us not flinch. If they challenge institutions that have long been deemed wise and natural, let us not turn back. Thank you. All right, next week, I'm going to talk about the law and the cause and the law of interest. That'll be the primary topic next week. Thank you very much for coming. Good night.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.